Hello, my name is Katie. I'm a neurodivergent coach here in Portland, Oregon, and I am back reading Nonviolent Communication with you today by Marshall B. Rosenberg. And we are on Chapter 11, Conflict Resolution and Mediation. Now that you are familiar with the steps involved in nonviolent communication, I want to address how to apply them in resolving conflicts. These could be conflicts between yourself and someone else, or you may be asked to or choose to involve yourself in a conflict between others, family members, partners, coworkers, or even strangers in conflict. Whatever the situation may be, resolving conflicts involves all the principles I outlined previously in this book: observing, identifying, and expressing feelings, connecting feelings with needs, and making doable requests of another person using clear, concrete, positive action language. Over the course of several decades, I've used nonviolent communication to resolve conflicts around the world. I've met with unhappy couples, families, workers and their employers, and ethnic groups at war with each other. My experience has taught me that it's possible to resolve just about any conflict to everybody's satisfaction. All it takes is a lot of patience and the willingness to establish a human connection, the intention to follow NVC principles until you reach a resolution and trust that the process will work. Human connection. In NVC-style conflict resolution, creating a connection between the people who are in conflict is the most important thing. This is what enables all the other steps of NVC to work, because it's not until you have forged that connection that each side will seek to know exactly what the other side is feeling and needing. The parties also need to know from the start that the objective is not to get the other side to do what they want them to do. And once the two sides understand that, it becomes possible, sometimes even easy, to have a conversation about how to meet their needs. With NVC, we're trying to live a different value system while we are asking for things to change. What's most important is that every connection along the line mirrors the kind of world we're trying to create. Each step needs to reflect energetically that what we're after, which is a holographic image of the quality of relationships we're trying to create. In short, how we ask for change reflects the value system we're trying to support. When we see the difference between these two objectives, we consciously refrain from trying to get a person to do what we want. Instead, we work to create that quality of mutual concern and respect where each party thinks their own needs matter, and they are conscious that their needs and the other person's well-being are interdependent. When that happens, it's amazing how conflicts that otherwise seem irresolvable are easily resolved. When I'm asked to resolve a conflict, I work to lead the two sides to this caring and respectful connection. This is often the tough part. Once that is accomplished, I help both sides create strategies that will resolve the conflict to both sides' satisfaction. Notice that I use the word satisfaction instead of compromise. Most attempts at resolution search for compromise, which means everybody gives something up and neither side is satisfied. NVC is different. Our objective is to meet everyone's needs fully. NVC conflict resolution versus traditional mediation. Let's consider the human connection aspect of NVC again. This time looking at third-party mediation, a person stepping in to resolve a conflict between two other parties. When I'm working with two people or two groups that have a conflict they haven't been able to resolve, I approach this very differently from the way professional mediators often approach a conflict. For example, once I was in Austria meeting with a group of professional mediators who work on many kinds of international conflicts, including those between unions and management. I described several conflicts I'd mediated, such as one in California between landowners and migrant workers, where there had been considerable physical violence. And I talked about mediating between two African tribes, which I discuss fully in my book Speak Peace in a World of Conflict, and a few other extremely entrenched, dangerous conflicts. I was asked how much time I give myself to study a situation I was to mediate. He was referring to the process most mediators use, educating themselves about the issues involved in the conflict, and then mediating with those issues as the focus instead of focusing on creating a human connection. In fact, in typical third-party mediation, the conflicting parties may not even be in the same room. Once, as a participant in mediation, our party was in one room and the other party was in another room, with the mediator traveling back and forth between rooms. He'd ask us, "What do you want them to do?" And he'd take that back to the other side and see if they were willing to do it. Then he would come back and say, "They're unwilling to do that. How about this?" Many mediators define their role as a third head, trying to think of a way to get everybody to come to an agreement. They are not at all concerned with creating a quality of connection, thus overlooking the only conflict resolution tool I have ever known to work. When I described the NVC model and the role of human connection, one of the participants at the Austria meeting raised the objection that I was talking about psychotherapy and that mediators were not psychotherapists. In my experience, connecting people at this level isn't psychotherapy. It's actually the core of mediation, because when you make the connection, the problem solves itself most of the time. Instead of a third head asking, "What can we agree to here?" if we had a clear statement of each person's needs, what those parties need right now from each other, we will then discover what can be done to get everybody's needs met. These become the strategies the parties agree to implement after the mediation session concludes and the parties leave the room. NVC conflict resolution steps, a quick overview. Before we get deeper into a discussion of some of the other key elements of conflict resolution, let me give you a thumbnail sketch of the steps involved in resolving a conflict between ourselves and somebody else. There are 5 steps in this process. Either side may express their needs first, but for the sake of simplicity in this overview, let's assume we begin with our needs. First, we express our own needs. Second, we search for the real needs of the other person, no matter how they are expressing themselves. If they are not expressing a need, but instead an opinion, judgment, or analysis, we recognize that and continue to seek the need behind their words, the need underneath what they are saying. Third, we verify that we both accurately recognize the other person's needs, and if not, continue to seek the need behind their words. Fourth, we provide as much empathy as is required for us to mutually hear each other's needs accurately. And fifth, having clarified both parties' needs in the situation, we propose strategies for resolving the conflict, framing them in positive action language. Throughout, we are listening to each other with utmost care, avoiding the use of language that implies wrongness on either side. On needs, strategies, and analysis. Since the understanding and expression of needs are essential to resolving conflicts through MVC, let us review this vital concept which has been emphasized throughout the book, and particularly in Chapter 5. Fundamentally, needs are the resources life requires to sustain itself. We all have physical needs: air, water, food, rest. And we all have psychological needs such as understanding, support, honesty, and meaning. I believe that all people basically have the same needs regardless of nationality, religion, gender, income, education. Next, let's consider the difference between a person's needs and his or her strategy for fulfilling them. It is important when resolving conflicts that we can clearly recognize the difference between needs and strategies. Many of us have great difficulty expressing our needs. We have been taught by society to criticize, insult, and otherwise miscommunicate in ways that keep us apart. In a conflict, both parties usually spend too much time intent on proving themselves right and the other party wrong, rather than paying attention to their own and the other's needs. And such verbal conflicts can far too easily escalate into violence and even war. In order not to confuse needs and strategies, it's important to recall that needs contain no reference to anybody taking any particular action. On the other hand, strategies, which may appear in the forms of requests, desires, wants, and solutions, refer to specific actions that specific people may take. For example, I once met with a couple who had just about given up on their marriage. I asked the husband what needs of his weren't being fulfilled in the marriage. He said, "I need to get out of this marriage." What he was describing was specific person himself taking a specific action, leaving the marriage. He wasn't expressing a need, he was identifying a strategy. I pointed this out to the husband and suggested that he first clarify his and his wife's needs before undertaking the strategy of getting out of this marriage. After both of them had connected with their own and each other's needs, they discovered that these needs could be met with strategies other than ending the marriage. The husband acknowledged his needs for appreciation and understanding for the stress generated by his rather demanding job. The wife recognized her needs for closeness and connection in a situation where she experienced her husband's job occupying much of his time. Once they truly understood their mutual needs, this husband and wife were able to arrive at a set of agreements that satisfied both their needs while working around the demands of the husband's job. In the case of another couple, the lack of needs literacy took the form of confusion before the expression of needs and the expression of analysis, and ultimately led to their inflicting physical violence on each other. I was invited to mediate in this situation at the end of a workplace training when a man tearfully described his situation and asked if he and his wife could speak with me in private. I agreed to meet with them at their home and opened the evening by saying, "I'm aware that you're both in a lot of pain. Let's begin with each of you expressing whatever needs of yours aren't being fulfilled in your relationship. Once you understand each other's needs, I'm confident we can work on strategies to meet those needs." Not being needs literate, the husband started off by telling his wife, "The problem with you is that you're totally insensitive to my needs." She answered in the same manner, "That's typical of you to say unfair things like that." Instead of expressing needs, they were doing analysis, which is easier heard as criticism by the listener. As mentioned earlier in this book, analyses that simply imply wrongness are essentially tragic expressions of unmet needs. In the case of this couple, the husband had a need for support and understanding, but expressed it in terms of the wife's insensitivity. The wife also had a need for being accurately understood, but she expressed it in terms of the husband's unfairness. It took a while to move through the layers of needs on the part of both husband and wife, but only through truly acknowledging and appreciating each other's needs were they finally able to begin the process of exploring strategies to address their long-standing conflicts. I once worked with a company where both morale and productivity took a dive due to a very disturbing conflict. Two factions in the same department were fighting over which software to use, generating strong emotions on both sides. One faction had worked especially hard to develop the software that was presently in use and wanted to see its continued use. The other faction had strong emotions tied up in creating new software. I started by asking each side to tell me what needs of theirs would be better fulfilled by the software they advocated. Their response was to offer an intellectual analysis that the other side received as criticism. A member on the side that favored new software said, "We can continue to be overly conservative, but if we do that, I think we could be out of work in the future. Progress means that we take some risks and dare to show that we are beyond old-fashioned ways of doing things." A member of the opposing faction responded, "But I think that impulsively grabbing for every new thing that comes along is not in our best interest." They acknowledged that they had been repeating these same analyses for months and were getting nowhere other than increasing tension for themselves. When we don't know how to directly and clearly express what we need, but can only make analyses of others that sound like criticism to them, wars are never far away, whether verbal, psychological, or physical. Sensing others' needs no matter what they're saying. To resolve conflicts using NVC, we need to train ourselves to hear people expressing needs regardless of how they do the expressing. If we really want to be of assistance to others, the first thing to learn is to translate any message into an expression of a need. The message might take the form of silence, denial, a judgment, remark, a gesture, or hopefully a request. We hone our skills to hear the need within every message, even if at first we have to rely on guesses. For example, In the middle of a conversation, if I ask the other person something about what they just said and am met with, "That's a stupid question," I hear them expressing a need in the form of a judgment of me. I proceed to guess what that need might be. Maybe the question I asked did not fulfill their need to be understood. Or if I ask my partner to talk about the stress in our relationship and they answer, "I don't want to talk about it," I may sense that their need is for protection from what they imagine could happen if we were to communicate about our relationship. So this is our work, learning to recognize the need in statements that don't overtly express any need. It takes practice and it always involves some guessing. Once we sense what the other person needs, we can check in with them and then help them put their need into words. If we are able to truly hear their need, a new level of connection is forged, a critical piece that moves the conflict toward successful resolution. In workshops for married couples, I often look for the couple with the longest unresolved conflict to demonstrate my prediction that once each side can state the other side's needs, it would take no more than 20 minutes for the conflict to come to a resolution. Once there was a couple whose marriage suffered 39 years of conflict about money. 6 months into the marriage, the wife had twice overdrawn their checking account, whereupon the husband took control of the finances and would no longer let her write checks. The two of them had never stopped arguing about it since. The wife challenged my prediction, saying that even though they had a good marriage and can communicate well, it wouldn't be possible for their historically entrenched conflict to resolve so quickly. I invited her to begin by telling me if she knew what her husband's needs were in this conflict. She replied, "He obviously doesn't want me to spend any money," to which her husband exclaimed, "That's ridiculous." In stating that her husband didn't want her to spend any money, the wife was identifying what I call a strategy. Even if she had been accurate in guessing her husband's strategy, she had nowhere identified his need. Here again is the key distinction. By my definition, a need doesn't refer to a specific action, such as spending or not spending money. I told the wife that all people share the same needs, and if she could only understand her husband's needs, the issue would be resolved. When encouraged again to state her husband's needs, she replied, "He's just like his father," describing how his father had been reluctant to spend money. At this point, she was making an analysis. I stopped her to ask again, what was his need? It became clear that even after 39 years of communicating well, she still had no idea what his needs were. I then turned to the husband. "Since your wife isn't in touch with what your needs are, why don't you tell her? What needs are you meeting by keeping the checkbook from her?" To which he responded, "Marshall, she's a wonderful wife, a wonderful mother, but when it comes to money, she's totally irresponsible." His use of diagnosis, "she is irresponsible," is reflective language that gets in the way of a peaceful resolution of conflicts. When either side hears itself criticized, diagnosed, or interpreted, the energy of the situation will likely turn toward self-defense and counter-accusations rather than toward resolution. I tried to hear the feeling and need behind him stating that his wife was irresponsible. Are you feeling scared because you have a need to protect your family economically? He agreed that this was indeed the case. Admittedly, I had merely guessed correctly, but I didn't have to get it right the first time because even if I guessed wrong, I would have still been focusing on his needs, and that's the heart of the matter. In fact, when we reflect back incorrect guesses to others, it may help them get in touch with their true needs. It takes them out of analysis toward greater connection to life. Have the needs been heard? The husband had finally acknowledged his need to keep his family safe. The next step is to ascertain that the wife heard that need. This is a crucial stage in conflict resolution. We must not assume that when one party expresses a need clearly, that the other party hears it accurately. I asked the wife, "Can you tell me back what you heard to be your husband's need in this situation?" "Well, just because I overdrew the bank account a couple of times, it doesn't mean I'm going to continue doing it." Her response was not unusual. When we have pain built up over many years, It can get in the way of our ability to hear clearly, even when what is being expressed is clear to others. To continue, I said to the wife, I'd like to tell you what I heard your husband say, and I'd like you to repeat it back. I heard that your husband says he has a need to protect the family, and he's scared because he wants to be sure that the family is protected. Empathy to ease the pain that prevents hearing. But she was still in too much pain to hear me. This brings up another skill that is needed if we are to effectively engage the NVC process of conflict resolution. When people are upset, they often need empathy before they can hear what is being said to them. In this instance, I changed course. Instead of trying to have her repeat what her husband had said, I tried to understand the pain she was in, the pain that kept her from hearing him. Especially if there is a long history of pain, it is important to offer enough empathy so that the parties feel reassured that their pain is being recognized and understood. When I address the wife with empathy, I sense that you're feeling really hurt and you need to be trusted that you can learn from past experience. The expression in her eyes showed me how much she needed that understanding. Yes, exactly, she replied. But when asked to repeat back what her husband said, she answered, he thinks I spend too much money. Just as we are not trained to express our own needs, most of us have not been trained in hearing the needs of others. All this wife could hear was criticism or diagnosis on part of her husband. I encouraged her to try to simply hear his needs. After I repeated his need for safety for his family 2 more times, she finally was able to hear it. Then, after a few more rounds, they were both able to hear each other's needs. And just as I predicted, once they understood for the first time in 39 years each other's needs concerning the checkbook, it took less than 20 minutes to find practical ways to meet both their needs. The more experience I have gained in mediating conflicts over the years, and the more I've seen what leads families to argue and nations to go to war, the more convinced I am that most school children could solve these conflicts. If we could just say, here are the needs of both sides, here are the resources. What can be done to meet these needs? Conflicts would be easily resolved. But instead, our thinking is focused on dehumanizing one another with labels and judgments until even the simplest of conflicts becomes very difficult to solve. NVC helps us avoid that trap, thereby enhancing the chances of reaching a satisfying resolution. Using present and positive action language to resolve conflict. Although I address the use of present positive action language in Chapter 6, I'd like to present a few more examples to demonstrate its importance in resolving conflicts. Once both parties have connected with each other's needs, the next step is to arrive at strategies that meet those needs. It's important to avoid moving hastily into strategies, as this may result in a compromise that lacks the deep quality of authentic resolution that is possible. By fully hearing each other's needs before addressing solutions, parties in conflict are much more likely to adhere to the arguments they make to each other. The process of resolving conflict has to end with actions that meet everybody's needs. It is the presentation of strategies and clear present positive action language that moves conflicts towards resolution. A present language statement refers to what is wanted at this moment. For example, one party might say, I'd like you to tell me if you'd be willing to, and describe the action they'd like the other party to take. The use of a present language request that begins with would you be willing to helps foster a respectful discussion. If the other side answers that they're not willing, it invites the next step of understanding that prevents their willingness. On the other hand, in the absence of present language, a request such as, I'd like you to go to the show with me Saturday night, fails to convey what's being asked of the listener at that moment. The use of present language to hone such a request, for example, would you be willing to tell me whether you will go to the show with me on Saturday night, supports clarity and ongoing connection in the exchange. We can further clarify the request by indicating that what we want from the other person in the present moment. Would you be willing to tell me how you feel about going to the show with me Saturday night? The clearer we are regarding the response we want right now from the other party, the more effectively we move the conflict toward resolution. using action verbs. In chapter 6, we touched upon the role of action language in forming NVC requests. In situations of conflict, it is especially important to focus on what we do want rather than what we do not want. Talking about what one doesn't want can easily create confusion and resistance among conflicting parties. Action language requires the use of action verbs while also avoiding language that obscures or language that can readily be inferred as an attack. I'd like to illustrate this with a situation where a woman expressed a need for understanding that wasn't being met in her primary relationship. After her partner was able to accurately hear and reflect back the need for understanding, I turned to the woman and said, "Okay, let's get down to strategies. What would you want from your partner in order to meet your need for understanding?" She faced her partner and said, "I'd like you to listen to me when I talk to you." "I do listen to you when you talk," the partner retorted. "It's not unusual if someone tells us they'd like us to listen when they are talking for us to hear accusations and thus feel some resentment." They went back and forth, with the partner repeating, "I do listen," and the woman countering, "No, you don't." They told me they'd had this conversation for 12 years, a situation that is typical in conflicts when parties use vague words like listen to express strategies. I suggest instead the use of action verbs to capture something that we can see or hear happening, something that can be recorded with a video camera. Listening occurs inside a person's head. Another person cannot see whether it is happening or not. One way to determine that someone is actually listening is to have the person reflect back what has been said. We ask the person to take an action that we ourselves can see or hear. If the other party can tell us what was just said, we know the person heard and was indeed listening to us. In another conflict between a husband and wife, the wife wanted to know that her husband respected her choices. Once she expressed her need successfully, her next step was to get clear on her strategy for meeting that need and to make a request of the husband. She told him, "I want you to give me the freedom to grow and be myself." "I do," he replied. And just as with the other couple, this was followed by a fruitless volley of "yes I do" and "no you don't." Non-action language, such as "give me the freedom to grow," often exacerbates conflict. In this instance, the husband heard himself being judged as domineering. I pointed out to the wife that it wasn't clear to her husband what she wanted. "Please tell him exactly what you'd like him to do to meet your need to have your choices respected." "I want you to let me," she began. I interrupted that "let" was too vague. "What do you really mean when you say you want someone to let you?" After reflecting for a few seconds, she arrived at an important understanding. She acknowledged that what she really meant when she said things like "I want you to let me be" or "I want you to give me the freedom to grow" is for her husband to tell her that no matter what she did, it was okay. And then she got clear as to what she was actually requesting. For him to tell her something, she recognized that what she wanted did not leave him much freedom to be himself and have his choices respected. And maintaining respect is a key element in successful conflict resolution. Translating no. When we express a request, it's very important to be respectful of the other person's reaction, whether or not they agree to do our request. Many mediations I have witnessed consist of waiting for people to wear down to the point where they'll accept any compromise. This is very different from a resolution in which everybody's needs are met and nobody experiences a loss. In Chapter 8, we discover the importance of not hearing a no as rejection. Listening carefully to the message behind the no helps us understand the other person's needs. When they say no, they're saying they have a need that keeps them from saying yes to what we're asking. If we can hear the need behind a no, we can continue the conflict resolution process, maintaining our focus on finding a way to meet everybody's needs, even if the other party says no to a particular strategy we presented them. NVC in the mediator role. Although in this chapter I have offered examples from mediations I facilitated between conflicting parties, the focus so far has been on how to apply these skills when resolving conflicts between ourselves and another person. There are, however, a few things to keep in mind at those times when we want to use our NVC tools to help two other parties reach a resolution and we take on the role of mediator. Your role and trust in the process. When entering a conflict process as mediator, When entering a conflict process as mediator, a good place to start might be to assure the people in conflict that we are not there to take sides, but to support them in hearing each other and to help guide them to a solution that meets everyone's needs. Depending on the circumstances, we may also want to convey our confidence that if the parties follow the steps of NVC, both of their needs will be met in the end. Remember, it's not about us. At the beginning of the chapter, I emphasized that the objective is not to get the other person to do what we want them to do. This also applies to mediating someone else's conflict. Though we may have our own wishes for how the conflict is resolved, especially if the conflict is between family, friends, or coworkers, we need to remember that we are not here to accomplish our own goals. The mediator's role is to create an environment in which the parties can connect, express their needs, understand each other's needs, and arrive at strategies to meet those needs. Emergency first aid empathy. As mediator, I stress my intention for both parties to be fully and accurately understood. Despite that, as soon as I express empathy toward one side, it is not unusual for the other side to immediately accuse me of favoritism. At this time, what's called for is emergency first aid empathy. This might sound like, so, you're really annoyed and you'd like some reassurance that you're going to get your side on the table. Once the empathy has been expressed, I remind them that everyone will have the opportunity to be heard and their turn will be next. It is then helpful to confirm they are in agreement with waiting by asking, for example, are you feeling reassured about that, or would you like some more reassurance that your opportunity to be heard will come soon? We may need to do this repeatedly to keep the mediation on track. Keep track, following the bouncing ball. When we are mediating, we have to keep score by paying careful attention to what has been said, making sure both parties have the opportunity to express their needs. Listen to the other person's needs and make requests. We also need to follow the bouncing ball, being conscious of where one party left off so we can return to what that party said after the other party has been heard. This can be challenging, especially when things get heated. In such situations, I often find it helpful to use a whiteboard or flip chart to capture the essence of what was spoken by the last speaker who had the opportunity to express a feeling or need. This form of visual tracking can also serve to reassure both parties that their needs will be addressed, because so often before we have a chance to fully draw out one party's needs, the other will be jumping ahead to express themselves. Taking the time to note those needs in a way that is visible to everyone present can help the listener feel comfortable that their own needs will also be addressed. In this way, everyone can more easily offer their full attention to what is being expressed in the current moment. Keep the conversation in the present. Another important quality to bring to mediation is awareness of the moment. Who needs what right now? What are their present requests? Maintaining this awareness requires a lot of practice and being present in the moment, which is something most of us have never been taught to do. As we move through the mediation process, it is likely that we will hear a lot of discussion about what happened in the past and what people want to happen differently in the future. However, conflict resolution can only happen right now, so now is where we need to focus. Keep things moving. Another mediation task is to keep the conversation from getting bogged down. This can happen very easily, as people often think that if they just tell the same story one more time, they will finally be understood and the other person will do what they want. To keep things moving, the mediator needs to ask effective questions and, when necessary, maintain or even speed up the pace. Once, when I was scheduled to lead a workshop in a small town, The event organizer asked if I would help him with a personal dispute related to the division of family property. I agreed to mediate, aware that there was only a 3-hour window in between workshops to do so. The family dispute centered on a man who owned a large farm and was about to retire. His 2 sons were at war over how the property was to be divided. They hadn't spoken in 8 years, even though they lived close to each other at the same end of the farm. I met the brothers, their wives, and their sister, all of whom were involved in this set of complicated legal matters and 8 years of pain. In order to get things moving and to stay on schedule, I had to speed up the mediation process. To keep them from spending time telling the same stories over and over, I asked one of the brothers if I could play his role, and then I would switch and play the part of the older brother. As I was going through my role play, I joked about wanting to see if I was playing the part right by asking if I could check in with my director. Looking over at the brother whose part I had been playing, I saw something I wasn't prepared for. He had tears in his eyes. I guess that he was experiencing deep empathy, both with himself from my playing his role, as well as for his brother's pain, which he had not seen until then. The next day, the father approached me, also with tearful eyes, to say that the night before the whole family had gone out to dinner for the first time in 8 years. Though the conflict had persisted for years, with lawyers on both sides working unsuccessfully to come to agreement, it became simple to resolve once the brothers heard each other's pain and needs as revealed through the role-playing. If I had waited for both of them to tell their stories, the resolution would have taken much longer. When relying on this method, I periodically turned to the person whose role I'm playing, addressing them as my director to see how I'm doing. For a while, I thought I had acting talent because of how often I find them crying and saying, "That's exactly what I've been trying to say." However, when I started training others in role-playing, I now know that many of us can do it as long as we are in touch with our own needs. No matter what else is going on, we all have the same needs. Needs are universal. I sometimes work with people who have been raped or tortured and where the perpetrator is absent. I would assume their role. Oftentimes the victim is surprised to hear me in the role-playing saying the same thing they had heard from the perpetrator, and press me with the question, "But how did you know?" I believe the answer to that question is that I know because I am that person, and so are we all. As we apply a literacy of feelings and needs, we are not thinking about the issues, but simply putting ourselves in the other person's shoes, trying to be that person. Getting the part right is not in our thoughts, although from time to time we check in with the director because we don't always get it right. Nobody gets it right all the time, and that's fine. If we're off the mark, the person whom we are playing will let us know one way or another. We are thus offered another opportunity to make a closer guess. Interrupting. Sometimes mediations get heated with people shouting at or talking over one another. To keep the process on track under such circumstances, we need to get comfortable with interrupting. Once when I was mediating in Israel and having a difficult time because my translator was too polite, I finally taught him to be nasty. "Shut them up," I instructed. "Tell them to wait until we at least get the translation out before they go back to screaming at each other." So when both sides are screaming or talking at the same time, I insert myself, "Excuse me, excuse me, excuse me." I repeat this as loudly and as often as necessary until I regain their attention. When we are grabbing their attention, we have to be quick. If the person reacts with anger when we interrupt, we can sense that they are in too much pain to hear us. This is the time for emergency first aid empathy. Here's what it might sound like, using an example from a business meeting. Okay, we have the speaker and the mediator. Speaker: "This happens all the time. They've already called 3 meetings, and each time there is some new rationale as to why it can't be done. Last time, they even signed an agreement. Now another promise, and it will be just that, another promise. There's little point in working with people who, excuse me, could you tell me what the other person said?" Realizing he had not listened to what has been said, "No!" So you're feeling so full of disgust right now and really need some trust that people will do what they say? Well, of course, but So, could you tell me what you heard them say? Let me repeat it to you. I hear the other side saying they have a real need for integrity. Could you just say it back so I'm sure we all understand each other? Silence. No? Let me say it again. And we say it again. We might view our role as that of a translator, translating each party's message so as to be understood by the other. I ask them to get used to my interrupting for the sake of resolving the conflict. When I do interrupt, I also check that the speaker feels that I'm translating them accurately. I translate many messages, even if I am only guessing, but the speaker is always the final authority on the accuracy of my translation. It's important to remember that the purpose of interrupting and grabbing people's attention back in this way is to restore the process of making observations, identifying and expressing feelings, connecting feelings with needs, and making doable requests using clear, concrete, positive action language. When people say no to meeting face-to-face, I am optimistic about what can happen when we bring people together to express their needs and requests. However, one of the biggest problems I have encountered is simply getting across to both parties. Because it occasionally takes time for a party to become clear about its own needs, mediators require adequate access in order for both parties to express and then receive each other's needs. Oftentimes, what we hear from someone in conflict is, no, there's no use talking, they won't listen. I've tried to talk and it doesn't work. To solve this problem, I've sought strategies to resolve conflicts where people in conflict are unwilling to meet. One method that shows promising results relies on the use of an audio recorder. I work with each party separately while playing the role of the other side. If there are two people in our own lives who are in too much pain to be willing to meet, this would be an option for us to consider. As an example, a woman was suffering heavily from a conflict with her husband, particularly from the way he was directing anger toward her. First, I listened in the way that supported her to clearly express her needs and to experience being received with respectful understanding. Then I took on the role of her husband and asked her to listen to me as I expressed what I guessed to be the husband's needs. The needs of the conflicting parties having been clearly conveyed in this role play, I asked the woman to share the recording with her husband for his reaction. Because I had, in this case, been accurate in guessing the husband's needs, he experienced huge relief when listening to the recording. With the increased trust that came from hearing himself understood, he later agreed to come in so we could work together until the two of them found ways of meeting their needs in mutually respectful ways. When the hardest thing about resolving a conflict is getting the parties together in the same room, the use of recorded role plays may be the answer. Informal mediation, sticking our nose in other people's business. Informal mediation is a polite way to refer to mediating in situations we've not been invited to do so. In so many words, we're sticking our nose in other people's business. I was shopping in a grocery store one day when I saw a woman strike her toddler. She was about to do it again when I jumped in. She didn't ask, "Marshall, would you mediate between us?" Another time, I was walking in the streets of Paris. A woman was walking alongside me when a rather inebriated man ran up from behind, turned her around, and slapped her in the face. As there wasn't time to talk with this man, I resorted to the protective use of force by restraining him just as he was about to strike her again. I inserted myself between the two and stuck my nose in their business. On another occasion, during a business exchange, I watched two factions in a repetitious exchange, arguing back and forth over an age-old issue, and again I stuck my nose in between them. When we witness behaviors that raise concern in us, unless it is a situation that calls for protective use of force as described in Chapter 12, the first thing we do is to empathize with the needs of the person who is behaving in the way we dislike. In the first situation, if we wanted to see more violence directed at the toddler, we could, instead of offering empathy to the mother, say something to imply that she was wrong to hit the child. Such a response on our part would only escalate the situation. In order to be truly helpful to people in whose business we are sticking our nose, we need to have developed an extensive literacy regarding needs and be well practiced at hearing the need in any message, including the need underneath the act of slapping another person. And we need to be practiced in verbal empathy such that the people sense that we are connected with their need. We need to remember when we choose to stick our nose in someone's business, it's not enough to simply support someone to get in touch with his or her own needs. We aim to practice all the other steps covered in this chapter. For example, after empathizing, we may tell the toddler's mother that we care about safety and have a need to protect people, and then request her willingness to try another strategy to meet her need with her child. We refrain, however, from mentioning our own needs regarding the person's behavior until it is clear to them that we understand and care about his or her needs. Otherwise, people will not care about our needs, nor will they see that their needs and ours are one and the same. As expressed so beautifully by Alice Walker in The Color Purple, one day when I was sitting quiet and feeling like a motherless child, which I was, it come to me, the feeling of being part of everything, not separate at all. I knew that if I cut a tree, my arm would bleed. Unless we make sure that both sides are aware of their own as well as each other's needs, it will be hard for us to succeed when we stick our nose in other people's business. We are likely to get caught up in scarcity thinking, seeing only the importance of our own needs being met. When scarcity thinking then gets mixed with right and wrong thinking, any of us can become militant and violent and blinded to even the most obvious solutions. At that point, the conflict seems unresolvable, and it will be if we don't connect with the other person by first offering empathy without focusing on our own needs. Summary. The use of NVC to resolve conflict differs from traditional mediation methods. Instead of deliberating over issues, strategies, and means of compromise, we concentrate foremost on identifying the needs of both parties, and only then seek strategies to fulfill those needs. We start by forging a human connection between the parties in conflict. Then we ensure that both parties have the opportunity to fully express their needs, that they can carefully listen to other person's needs, and that once the needs have been heard, they clearly express doable action steps to meet those needs. We avoid judging, or analyzing the conflict, and instead remain focused on needs. When one party is in too much pain to hear the needs of the other, we extend empathy, taking as long as necessary to ensure that the person knows their pain is heard. We do not hear no as a rejection, but rather as an expression of the need that is keeping the person from saying yes. Only after all needs have been mutually heard do we progress to the solution stage, making doable requests using positive action language. When we assume the role of mediating a conflict between two parties, the same principles apply. In addition, we keep careful track of progress, extend empathy where needed, keep that conversation focused on the present, moving it forward, and interrupting where necessary to return to the process. With these tools and understanding, we can practice and help others resolve even long-standing conflicts to their mutual satisfaction. Whew! What a chapter. Okay. What is important in mediation? If you don't answer identifying needs, then I think you need to listen to this again, because it's very, very clear that you have to start by identifying needs. I love how clear this book is, and I feel like I could not say the word needs for like another 10 years and be totally happy. Next chapter is chapter 12, the protective use of force. We are so close to being done. I think we have three chapters left. We can do it. Nonviolent Communication by Marshall B. Rosenberg. Hope you have a great day, and thanks for doing your best to learn something new, or just keep integrating something that you've already learned. Talk to you soon. Bye.